What's going on, guys? Billy here, and DJI now has two ready-to-fly FPV drones that make up their lineup. We've got the self-titled DJI FPV drone and the newest addition here in the DJI Avata. Now, it's no secret that if you purchase a first-generation product, you're basically consenting to be a beta tester, and that's kind of what the experience felt like with the first-generation DJI FPV drone. You could tell what DJI wanted to do with this drone, but there were some things that definitely needed to be improved upon for a second-generation drone, a second-generation FPV drone. I mean, this really was a first of its kind in a sense that it had all of the great GPS features built in, but could also fly in acro mode like an FPV drone. Now, as I mentioned in my review video, the Avata is not a DJI FPV drone 2. While the premise is the same, being a drone that can fly in manual with GPS convenience features included, it's built for a different style of flying that I think will suit more people. With that said, these two drones here offer two different flight experiences, and if you're someone that is on the fence about which to purchase, or if you're in the boat of wondering if you should make the upgrade from your DJI FPV drone to the Avata, I'm going to help you make that decision here in this video. Now, while there is plenty to make these two drones different, I do want to set the framework for this video by discussing what's similar, because at their core, these drones fundamentally are very identical. So let's go over a quick checklist of what makes these two drones similar. Both of them have the same flight modes, so normal, sport, and manual, with the ability to enable an attitude limit when flying in manual to prevent accidental rollover. That means that you'll be able to fly slow in normal, pick up the speed with continued GPS-aided flight in sport mode, or take complete control in manual mode, also known as acro. Both of these drones also have GPS redundancy built in, so along with the ability to hold altitude and hover in the same spot, both the FPV drone and the Avata also have fail-safes built in, like a pause button, manual override, and return to home. What I mean by manual override is that as you're flying around with either of these drones in the acro mode, once the drone begins to detect that you're losing signal, it'll bring the drone to a hover, flip you out of the manual mode, and then return your drone to home. Now, this won't always happen. Like, if you start to experience a little bit of breakup, it'll let you continue to fly through that. But if the drone detects that you get past a certain threshold, then it engages return to home as a failsafe, which is a really great safety feature to have built in. So with all that being said, again, both of these drones offer the same flight modes, normal, sport mode, and acro mode, and they have those great GPS features built in, like return to home, altitude hold, and GPS positioning, which most FPV drones wouldn't come equipped with. Now, while those are the main things that make these two drones alike, there are a few other tidbits I figured I'd share, like the fact that they both use the same exact remotes, the motion controller and the FPV controller too. They also kind of use the same goggles, as both drones are able to use the FPV Goggles version 2, but the newer DJI Goggles 2 is exclusive to the Avata for now, as long as they don't decide to open it up to future drones. I know it's kind of confusing with both goggles having the same number at the end of them, but they are very much different. Inside of these goggles, the UI is very familiar, as we're basically running a new version of the DJI Fly app built for FPV drones. The experience and UI is much more refined in the Goggles 2 for a lot of reasons, but just know that the general features are basically identical. With similar remotes and goggles, both of these drones use the same O3 transmission system with the same exact specifications, so the same range, the same bit rate, the same bandwidth, the same everything. So they are phenomenal in that regard. There is one slight difference, and that is that the FPV drone has 4 antennas, while the Avata only has 2 antennas, but they have great range and penetration, which is really important in a FPV drone. The final similarity between these two drones is a little bit more broad. It's the mission. It's the reason that these drones were created, and that's to make first-person view flight easier and more accessible to those that otherwise wouldn't want to learn because maybe they didn't want to build their own drone, or maybe it seemed a little bit too intimidating. But now jumping onto a platform like the Avata or like the FPV drone gives you the ability to first fly it like a GPS drone, like a Mavic, and work your way to then eventually fly your drone in acro mode. And for those that already know how to fly FPV, this just makes the overall experience easier for you. So yeah, the mission of these two drones is the final similarity. It's the reason they were made, and it's to make FPV flight easier. So no matter which of these drones you decide to purchase, those are the things that you can expect from either platform. Now, as we move on here, let's go over what makes them different so you can figure out which one is right for you. Maybe speed is your most important thing, so you might favor the FPV drone, or maybe durability is at the top of your list, so you might go with the Avata. Regardless though, again, both offer a great flight experience with the same flight modes and redundancy relevancy built in. To kick off this comparison, why don't we start with the FPV drone because it has a little bit more seniority. Now this drone certainly is bigger and heavier, but that gives it an advantage in a couple of key categories on the spec sheet. For one, it's faster with a top speed of 88 miles an hour compared to the top speed of 60 miles an hour on the Avata. The vertical speed is also much faster with the FPV drone, reading on the spec sheet that when flying in manual, there is no limit when either ascending or descending. In sport mode though, the maximum vertical speed is 34 miles an hour on the FPV drone compared to 13 miles an hour on the Avata, which is almost a 2.5 times difference. So overall, the FPV drone is faster, it's more agile, but this kind of brings us back to one of the first points I made in this video, and it's the fact that both of these drones were designed for different styles of flying. The Avata is a Cinewhoop, right? It's got smaller propellers, it's got built-in propeller guards, so therefore it's designed for more slower cinematic flying, and you're probably going to be in close quarters with this drone, so therefore those propeller guards are great to have built in so you don't damage objects, and you also probably aren't going to do much damage to the drone itself. But man, if you look at the overall thrust of the FPV drone, this thing can really get after it. I mean, this is a very fast drone. The top speed in sport mode is double that of the Cinewhoop here, of the Avata. I mean, you can fly in sport mode in 60 miles an hour with the FPV drone compared to 30 miles an hour with the Cinewhoop. So again, really different flying styles. If you're looking for all-out speed, then the FPV drone is going to be your best bet here in this regard. Now, the FPV drone's larger battery also technically gives it 1 extra minute of flight time, but when pushing these drones in manual, ripping around, you'll likely only get about half of that advertised flight time, and really, this is a negligible difference between the Avata and the FPV drone. Now, the larger stature of the FPV drone also gives DJI more room to add forward obstacle avoidance, where the Avata only has a group of sensors underneath of the drone that help it hover in place and hold its altitude. These sensors only work in the normal mode, though, on the FPV drone here, and chances are you're probably going to be ripping in sport mode or manual mode, so yes, they are there and should be mentioned, but I'm not sure it's a big deal because of the nature of these drones. Okay, so speed and sensors is pretty much what the FPV drone has going for it. It's what makes this drone stand out. But now let's move on to what the Avata has going for it and discuss some of the improvements that DJI has made, because there's a lot of awesome quality of life improvements that have been added to this drone. So for probably the biggest difference in favor of the Avata is the durability. This drone is built entirely different than the FPV drone, with built-in guards that protect the propellers, and it has a rigid cage that protects the battery and electronic components in the middle. Even the camera sits just behind the frame of the drone, so this is a very durable and well-built drone. Putting this side by side with the FPV drone just further highlights the weak points of the FPV drone, like the exposed propellers and the fragile arms. Now, to make myself clear, most FPV drones don't have propeller guards on them. It's really only the Cinewhoops that use them because of the style of flying that they're designed for when you're in close quarters. So if you bump up against something, it's not going to do any damage and you can kind of continue to fly. You don't usually see a big FPV drone like this with propeller guards on because they're made of carbon fiber. So if you slam into a pole, likely all you're doing is changing out your propellers, maybe the action camera on top, and that's it. The drone is good to continue to fly, but because the FPV drone is a little bit more fragile, you want to be more careful. The Avata's design being more durable has given me more confidence when flying as opposed to the more fragile FPV drone. I'm getting closer to objects, I'm flying faster, I'm flying in different places, and that has made the overall experience more fun. I felt like I had to baby the FPV drone, which led to mostly boring flights, unfortunately. Along with being more durable, early signs point to the Avata being fairly easy to repair as well. My buddy Ken Dono did a slight teardown of the Avata to make some 3D accessories for it and found that the disassembly process and repair process for certain components were much easier than that on the FPV drone, which is definitely good for the type of flying that you'll be doing with the Avata in case you crash it and break it. Now moving on here to a big upgrade, this is where the Avata has a massive leg up, and that is the camera. That camera on the Avata is a massive step up from the camera on the FPV drone. Like, it's actually usable. You could mount a GoPro or the Action 2 to your drone if you wanted, and I think it was necessary on the FPV drone because that camera was very mediocre, but the Avata introduces a lot of great improvements that make the video it shoots way better. I'll throw some example video up here on the screen of two similar routes flown with both drones, and I'll include the specs on the screen. The sensor is larger, the field of view is wider, the bit rate is higher. This camera camera's literally better in every way, and it's even noticeable in ways that aren't measured by specs. The color science is on point and the dynamic range is great, giving us an all-around excellent looking image. Now in the coming days, I'm going to be making a more in-depth video regarding this next benefits going with the Avata, and that is the ability to use the smaller and newer DJI Goggles 2. Now to clear things up, the Goggles 2 and the FPV Goggles version 2 can be used with the new Avata, but only the FPV Goggles version 2 can be used with the FPV drone, as the new Goggles 2 are only compatible with the Avata at the time of making this video. Now, could they make these backwards compatible in a future firmware update? Yes, they absolutely could. Will they? I'm not so sure. But again, just to be clear, Goggles 2 with Avata, FPV Goggles version 2 with FPV drone or Avata. I know it is so confusing. They both have very similar names, but they look different, and that is one of the biggest changes here with this goggles upgrade. Smaller, slimmer, sleeker, a lot easier to put on your face, a lot less fatiguing when you're flying for long periods of time, just because they are smaller and more lightweight. They also have upgraded panels. They have little diopter adjusters on the bottom. They're much better than what's found on these older FPV Goggles version 2. So overall, a much bigger upgrade that we'll go over more in depth in the next video I upload probably tomorrow. Now, the final point in favor of the Avata is that it's generally more beginner friendly, and I think that it has to do with a culmination of the things that we've discussed throughout this video. The durability is a big factor here, as it's more forgiving if you were to crash, and I think that the flight characteristics aren't as intimidating as the FPV drone. I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, but it certainly isn't as fast, so it feels easier to control. Don't think that the Avata is only for beginners though. I think that if you're in the market for a Cinewhoop and you've got some experience flying an FPV drone, then this is going to be a great option for you, as it's kind of the whole entire kit. It's got a great camera, great battery life, great flight time. It's got a great build quality, right? It's got a great digital transmission system. It's got everything you could want in a Cinewhoop and more. Now, what is the final verdict here in this comparison? So if you're somebody that's looking to purchase one of these FPV drones and you're trying to decide which one is right for you, here's how I would go. If you want something that's fast, like you are hell-bent on purchasing the fastest FPV drone that DJI flies or that DJI sells, then you are gonna go with their FPV drone, the first one that came out, because it is much faster, much more agile, much more thrusty. Like you can feel this has much more power than the Avata. But if you're interested in an FPV drone for literally anything else, whether it be the camera, whether it be the durability, whether it be the small little upgrades they've introduced, kind of because now they know more about how to build this drone, then you should go with the Avata. So I'd say that I'd probably recommend the Avata over the FPV drone to most people that are in the market for purchasing one of these. But now let's talk about, what if you already have the FPV drone, right? Like what if you already own this drone? Should you go out and purchase the Avata? Well, I would say there's probably one deciding factor, and it's like, if you own the FPV drone, how do you fly it, right? Like for me with this drone, I felt like I had to fly it a little bit more reserved, because if I crashed it, I'd then need to get it fixed or replaced because of the nature of the drone, because it has the plastic arms, because it is a little bit more fragile. But now once I started flying this drone, all of that care has gone out of my head. Like I fly this carefree, and it's almost a refreshing experience. So if you're in that similar boat, maybe go ahead and pick up the Avata, because if you already have the FPV drone with the goggles and the controller, you can use those same peripherals with the Avata and save the money and just purchase the drone for, I think, $630, which is a good price for this entire kit. So if you're looking to purchase one of these drones, go with the FPV drone if you want speed, go with the Avata if you want literally anything else. And if you already own the FPV drone, and if you feel like you're flying a little bit more reserved because of how fragile it is, then go with the Avata because it's a little bit more durable. That is my ending thoughts right there. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts of these two drones down in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.